even when I hit what I would objectively say is a high bar, I didn't ever go, okay, cool, you're done for a bit. Like, you can just take a break. I just went, what's next?
Hey, writers. Hard truth time. Getting published is not easy. Sometimes getting published isn't the end of the road. I sat down with Laurie Steed, whose first book, You Belong Here, came out in 2017. His new book, Love Dad, came out this August. At the time of recording, today is launch day. His journey was really interesting because, well, I'll let him tell you. Hi, Laurie. It's good to see you.
Hey, Joe, how are you? You too.
Oh, great, thank you. So this is Laurie Steed, and he is the author of Love Dad, out today. Well, today is the day of recording. It's been out for a bit by the time we see this. Yeah, let's see it. Let's see it.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, just before we got started, you were saying that you went out and bought yourself a copy today. I've never heard of an author doing this. Is this like something that authors do a lot? If they go to the bookstore and buy their copy?
I would not encourage anyone to do that. But my wife, beloved wife, she suggested it was a good thing to do. So we went to the local bookstore. They couldn't find the book, which was always fun. And so they went out back and they did find the book. And then when they got the book, they said, do you have a membership here? And I said, well, yes, I do. And they said, what's your phone number? And it was at that point that I realized that my name was going to come up on the screen that was also on the book on the counter, which was a pretty dorky moment, but kind of beautiful too. And then at that point she said, oh, do you want to sign some copies? And I said, well, that would be great. And she said, all right, we've got one other copy. So I proceeded to sign the one copy they had in the bookstore. So look, it's probably a necessarily humbling moment. You just go, well, there's a book in the shop. It's definitely there. If someone were to walk in and say, do you have a copy of Love Dad? They have one. So people need to be quick in Western Australia to get the one copy of Love Dad. It's signed. That's got to be worth something. I'm not sure what the valuation process is, but it's got to be worth something in the grand scheme of things,
All the good feels. All the good feels.
Yeah.
I was just going to circle back and like there are two in the bookshop, and you bought one. And you said that was humbling. I just, we were talking a little bit before, and I just thought some of what you said of insight into the journey of a published author is really interesting, and something that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that before I talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's a very strange thing, I guess, one, to have a book out full stop, and two, to have a book out 5 years after you had the first book out. And three, to have gone through the journey, which we can get into, about how to even get to the point of publication with Love Dad. And so it was a funny thing that I haven't previously gone to a bookstore to buy a copy of my own book. So I think this time around, I'm letting myself have a sort of sense of enoughness in every part of it. So what's really funny about it is, as like a mentor and a manuscript assessor, writing teacher, I often say to my writers, the book is the gift, everything else is a bonus. And it's brilliant, it sounds very wise and very erudite. And then what the problem is I forget that, and I'm like, hey dude, you tell people this, it's true, and you've forgotten it. Like, come on, man. Like, the book is actually the gift, that you sat down and that you wrote the words and everything else. So for me this time around, it's a really funny thing, because obviously, for the people who don't know, I was in Varuna with Joe at the writer's house working on this book. And there was this strange feeling that came over as I started the book, because I started being me on the page. And I had this sort of like an alarm bell going off, like, you shouldn't be you. This is a really dangerous thing to do as a writer.
I remember you saying
that.
But
I was at the point, with real challenges in my own literary career, where I was pushed against a corner of like perfection and excellence, and it just wouldn't work anymore. So I had to go, well, if I'm not being excellent or perfect, I guess I have to be me and see what I say in this book. So it ended up being a memoir about being a dad. It's also a lot about being a writer too. So there are these moments that in hindsight have been included where I fell short as a writer. which, to be frank, are probably even worse than the moments I fell short as a parent, because they're so kind of confronting and humbling to go, oh, wow, you messed up. And then try to go, that's okay. Like, that's what writers do. Like, it's just that most of the time no one sees when they mess up because there's a book there.
And you
And the
wrote it in a
book's
book and
fine.
published
The
it
book's great.
and signed your name
The
on it.
book's like, when you used to watch those cooking shows, right? And then the cooking show, they go, here's one we prepared earlier, because the bowl is a mess and there's like bits of ham hanging off and stuff like that. So they always go back to the one they put in the oven like hours ago. And that's what it's like with this. You go, here's my book, it's great. And they go, well, hang on, why have you got chocolate on your pants? And, all this stuff that's like a total with the space. So, yeah, it's, humbling is definitely a good word for it. It's also just a relief. And then at the same level, I said to my wife last night, oh my God, tomorrow's publication day of the book. And she said, and you know what? It's not going to be that different. And she said, and you know what? It's going to be even less different. And the day after that, it's going to be just the same day as you always have. So I think we get given these goals, right? And definitely a published book is one of those ones where you think this must change the world. And then whether it's like a waiter that didn't give you soy milk, or if it's like a kid who spills juice everywhere, or whatever it is, something goes, cool, let's move on. Cool, you got your book done, let's move on. And you're like, not yet, I'm trying to celebrate. Interesting.
I love this, and I did mention this a couple of episodes ago when I talked to Rachel, but when I came into Varuna, I had major imposter syndrome. I was there on an invited residency, not a fellowship, and that was made very clear in a way that was helpful, but also, it's like that ego. It's like, I'm finally at Varuna, but it's in the back. It's I have to go ask somebody to go get it for me, kind of thing. And I came into the room and you and Rachel were sitting on the couch talking, and I just total imposter syndrome, and you both made me feel so welcome. And then over the course of the week, as you shared your journeys and the other people in the house shared theirs as well, I realized that we're all just failing. Like even like you got published book, Rachel had published book, you have like book deals and all these kinds of things were happening around me. Everybody else had the exact same struggles and frustrations that I had as an unpublished writer. Like getting the book out did not change the world. And I went, oh, okay. Right. So this is the journey of the long haul. It doesn't actually matter if I get published or not. It's not going to solve all my problems. It's not going to make me feel better. It's not. It's just if I actually want this, it's just a journey.
Well, I think that's such an insightful thing to note about this whole gig, and that's only really just recently have I clicked that every single writer I met while trying to be an excellent or a perfect writer was so amazing and so kind and so compassionate and so generous that it was like a Rubik's Cube or something, like it all put it together, and you went, wait, so hang on, this is a life I'm making here with amazing people to connect with while I'm trying to do this really hard thing. And so you're right that like I've not yet met a writer who has got that whole imposter syndrome thing down at all. And there's something about doing the work that is like a balm on the whole thing. Like if you're doing the work, then you're like, I am enough and I'm okay. And in fact, even if you take 3 months off and just think about doing the work, you're actually okay then as well. It's just that there's a sort of a busyness about the writing space, particularly online and in socials and stuff, that seems to suggest that achievements are like filling your car with petrol and stuff like that. Like you just got to keep doing it again and again and again. And so you just have this insatiable thing about it. So it's like, and I remember feeling like that at points. Like even when I hit what I would objectively say is a high bar, I didn't ever go, okay, cool, you're done for a bit. Like you can just take a break. I just went, what's next? Okay, well, now that you've hit that, what's next? Yeah. And it was like having the worst coach, just constantly drilling me. And For what it's worth as well, I don't know if Rachel would say the same. I certainly felt like it was a real breath of fresh air having you in the space
Mm-hmm.
because there was that real hunger, that real passion. You didn't have 101 stories about the dicks within the industry and people that pissed you off. You just really wanted to do what you wanted to do, and that was important to you. And so I
Thank
think
you.
there's something really pure in that creative space that says, you know, I'm even that you're willing to step into that discomfort zone and go, I care enough about my writing and I want to pursue it that I'm willing to be in that learner space. And so I think a lot more writers could do that and go, hey, you know what? Screw my brand, screw my profile, screw whatever. Like, I don't know, but I want to know. I want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get better. And so, yeah, for me, it was real synchronicity because I was at that space in a different genre. So I'd come in there as this sort of elder statesman of short stories, and I was stuck profoundly in that genre. And so then to have been invited, well, firstly by some odd guy on the train, and then by the Varuna consultant, and then by everyone at Varuna to step into a space I'd never written too much before, just felt like a real gift to be able to go, I don't know, I'm learning, and I'm going to let things through to the keeper that when I was writing short stories, I just wouldn't or couldn't. I'd spend 8 to 10 years on a story sometimes just to get it right. And at that point, the joke's really on you. Like, people have paid off mortgages and done stuff like that. In the meantime, they've had children, or like they've, moved to a different country, and there you are on the same single story you've been working on for that long. So I think the blessing of going and doing the work, I don't know, like, I'm psyched that the book's published and it's out there. If you were like, what's the best part of that entire book journey? It's still those 2 weeks. It's those 2 weeks when I was in a flow state around the best people I'd met in ages and around nature. I could walk around nature, listen to my favorite album over and over, and, I guess be present in a really profound way. And when we're parents, it's hard to do that too, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
if you've got kids, you kind of are present, but you're not present with you. You're present with
Mm-mm.
them.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to have 2 weeks after 8 years raising two boys where I mattered again enough to just write and not even get outcomes, not even share stuff, whatever, just write and do the work was a real gift. And I was really glad you were there too.
Oh, thank you. Actually, I would love to go back because I know that you wrote Love Dad during those 2 weeks, that this first draft, and I know that that was not what you were planning to do on your way there. I know that story, but I think that story is fantastic, and I was wondering if you'd share that story with our listeners.
Sure. So yeah, about in about December 2000 or maybe October 2020, just before that, I'd applied for the Varuna fellowships at various writing residencies, and I'm lucky enough to have gotten one. And the book I happened to get it for, it's called the Henry Handel Richardson Flagship Fellowship, was for my short story collection. It was all well and good, except that I'd been through hell with that book up to that point anyway. So my publisher had closed down, the publisher of my first book had closed down, and then COVID hit 2 weeks after I submitted my book everywhere, and I never got responses for any of those because of COVID. So for someone to say, yes, we want you to go to the Blue Mountains and work on this book that's had the most indifferent response to anything in the world, just seemed like the worst idea ever. Anyway, I was catching up with friends before I went, and one of my friends, she said to me, there's one story in your collection, it's called The Present, and she said, that's really amazing. Like, it feels like it's really vital, and it's about a dad and two young kids. And she said, maybe you could write more of that. And I was like, well, yeah, nice try. Like, no, it's not going to happen. And then I wrote 2 articles for Place Heroic Center for Stories. And they were both about being a dad, but they were non-fiction. They're very short pieces. And again, I didn't really think much of it. It was just a publication deadline and everything else. And then when I got on the plane from Perth to Varuna, it was the first time I've been away from my boys in really 8 years aside from one trip. And suddenly I just started writing about being a dad, and little bits and bobs were coming through, and I thought, oh, this is strange, it's really coming out of me. And then when I got on the train from Sydney to Varuna, I was riding away with my headphones on, and this guy gets on, and he's in his mid-20s. He's got blonde hair, beanie, and a little goatee, and he just smiles at me with unconditional love, like immediately. And I'm like, oh, I don't know about this guy at all. Like, I really, something's very suspect about this guy. And then this quiet voice inside my head goes, well, it gets worse, because you're going to talk to him and you're going to find out what's going on with him, and you're going to tell him how you're going and what's struggling. I was like, no way, I don't want to do that. And the voice is like, no, you're going to do it. So I did, and I said to him, hey, I'm going to Varuna. I don't know, I'm meant to be writing this book, but I'm not really feeling it. And he smiled again, and he said, oh, that's great. And I said, well, how can that be great? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And he said, well, you just be the mountain. And you'll just be the darkness, and you'll be the skies and the clouds and the water running through, and your fingers on the keyboard. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty intense, man. And then we talked some more, and I said to him, so where do you even live? And he said, I put my tent up wherever I want in the Blue Mountains, and I sleep there. And then I get up, pack my tent up, and I find another place. And I said, but that's mad. And he's like, no, that's the darkness. He said, the darkness is the most beautiful thing in the world. It's like when everything's dark. And I'm going, am I in the right life? Like, have I gone into the Matrix or something? So then I said to him, where are you getting off then? And he smiled and he said, I don't know. And then I said, okay. I said, well, I'm getting off at Katoomba. And when we got to Katoomba, I said, are you getting off here? And he looked up and he smiled again and he said, yeah. And I went, okay. And so he got off, and as we were walking off the train station, I said, can you tell me which way I need to go to get out of this train station to get to Katoomba? And he like grinned and he goes, when we get there, you'll know. And I was like, well, we're just about there. Like, we're on the train station. And then when we did get there, he put his arms out. And he smiled at me again, and I said, what the are you doing? Like, what is this? And he said, I'm stopping you from going the wrong way. So at that point, I went, there's some weird stuff going on here, and I don't know what it is or how to make sense of any of it. And I thought, well, you've gotten away from the guy on the train. So that's a start. You can get to Varuna, and you can just sit down and write sensibly. And then when I got to Varuna, firstly, Carol, the consultant, she just wasn't there at my appointment. And I was sitting in that main room going, where's Carol? Like, she's not here. This is weird. So I started writing again, and I sent her an email. I was like, Carol, are we meant to be meeting up? And she's like, I'm not coming yet. And I'm like, oh, this is so strange. She's like, I'll come at like 11 or 12 or something. And I was like, okay. So I started writing some more on the book. And then when she comes, I tell her the same thing I tell Alex on the train. I say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm meant to be here to write this short story collection. I got a fellowship to do it. And she's like, well, what's really going on? And I said, well, look, I want to write this memoir about being a dad. And she's Canadian. And she just looked at me, and the same Alex smile came on her as well. And she went, do it. I said, what? She goes, do it now. And I said, what are you talking about? And she, oh, you can't do that, can you? And she's like, you can do anything you want. And then she says, in fact, I don't want to see you again in these 2 weeks. Go to your room and like write. So suddenly I had this freedom that I had to do this project, and not me pushing myself around, but just a bunch of encouragement and like genuine joy from other people that this was going to be awesome. And, yeah, it was awesome. And so I set myself up, because she said, I want you to do it and get it done within the 2 weeks. I did a quick calculation on word count that I'd have to hit every single day without fail. And I think it was 6,750 a day. So I made sure I hit those every day, come what may. And somehow I still caught up with people at nighttime every time. But
You
I just
did.
worked
Yeah, you were
hard.
always there.
I was always there at night, but basically it would mean that I had brekkie, went for a walk for like an hour around the Blue Mountains, came back, put on this one Genesis album that I listened to the whole time, and wrote to that, sitting, standing at the standing desk, and watched comedy at lunchtime. And other than that, I was working. I didn't read anything during the time because I was ready to just write it all. And the deal was I couldn't edit as I was going. I just had to just get it out first. And it was really liberating and fun. And there was no thought to publication or market or anything, which is weird because surely that would come up, but it just didn't at all. In fact, I thought I was going to die, like on the last day at Varuna, because it just seemed too good. Like it just seemed too good that everything was working. I was like, well, something's going to blow up. Like Tuba's going to get meteors coming down or something. Like this just can't be this good for this long. But I think I'd like to think every writer will get a moment like that if they keep going. Like I think it's like you've worked really hard at this. Let's make it easier for a bit. And I hope that is a universal law of sorts. I don't know if it is, but for me, having been basically pants down for 20 years trying to write, getting like one book out and a bunch of short stories that were heralded but never read, it was really nice just to have it work for 2 weeks.
You've mentioned it a couple of times, so I have it here. Your first book.
Love. Oh, I love You Belong Here. That's wonderful. Thanks for bringing it into the mix. We've got a lot of pride for that book.
Yeah. So let's circle back to this is your first book. How did this get published?
Well, and this will sound really funny now that I've just told you that story of drafting a book in 2 weeks. So in 2009, I wrote a short story called The Doppler Effect. And the Doppler Effect was about a guy who was an astronaut in the States. And his dad worked at like sort of mission control. So he was like his guide. And the mum featured in the story in flashbacks. And it was the son and the mum. And they were Australian in a park just having a fight, basically, like the kid not wanting to do what the mum wanted him to do. And then the astronaut story was like this dad trying to guide the son home and hopefully nothing bad would happen. And it was a weird story, and I had this question I needed to answer, which is how could a kid want to be so close to his parents but also need so much distance that he would be up in a rocket in space just to get the necessary distance from his family of origin. And so obviously the astronaut stuff went, although there is a draft of You Belong Here that has Alex doing astronaut training, like everything to do with it, which would be a very different book.
It would, yeah.
And from 2010, I know, totally different, right? And so from 2000, that story never got published. And from 2010 to 2016, or maybe even 17, I worked on that book for 6-7 years. And I did part of it as a PhD for a long part of that, and the rest of it, I guess, after the PhD. So You Belong Here was a funny thing because it had publisher interest and they wanted me to change the book quite radically. And at the time, and I think I'd still think the same way, it would have ruined the book, what they were wanting me to do, but it would have made it a much more commercial book. So in an unthinkable situation, I stood my guns and said, no, that's not the book I want to write. And needless to say, that added probably 1 or 2 more years onto its life in terms of getting it done the way I wanted to get it done. And so the hard part for me was that in terms of giving myself clues, the only clue I had when I started that book was a DNA double helix. And I was like, that's how the stories are going to go. They're going to be separate and then they're going to come together and then they're going to go out again, they're going to come together, they're going to go out. So I'm sitting there like a total crackhead with a double helix in my head and 52 stories, which I eventually wrote for that book, that have gone down to 22 for the final version because there were 4 generations of the Slater family. And so I buffed it down to a tighter range. I really just wanted to write a family love story, but also one that was honest. Like there's sort of, I've encountered family texts before, but they're sassy and kind of like just sassy. And I'm like, I don't want just sassy. I want the real deal and the anger and the stress and the tension between these people. And I think I wanted to understand families a little better by writing it. And I do a bit more. The only downside with that is I really love the Slaters and I didn't want to say goodbye to them at all. They really try. Like they kind of suck, but they really do want to make
They
it
do.
better.
They do kind of suck.
And so that to me was a space I didn't want to leave behind, because I was like, well, you guys are really trying. Like, but as you say, like they're not great. They're a pretty messy family at the best of times. So yeah, 8 years in total, I guess, roughly 9 to 2017 before publication date of 2018, and everything was different by the time I came out the other side. But it's very weird to write a book you're deeply proud of that was probably by any objective perspective not a huge breakout success, and you're still proud of it. You just go, oh well, I guess I'm that guy. No one chooses to be the guy that no one really backs. Like, no one chooses to be the guy who knows his craft but doesn't really know marketability. But maybe I'm that guy. Like, I do know writing back to front. I don't necessarily know the industry or marketing or any of that stuff very well. So I guess the question, and it was funny, you brought it up a little while back. We were talking about some other stuff. And I do think this idea of the question is the amount. So someone says, like, what's the point at which you would change your approach? So for me, I haven't found a financial amount that would make me bench me wanting to write the letter I want to write. I don't know if I ever will, but certainly at the time, I was glad I stuck to my guns with You Belong Here. More just for me, I guess, than anyone else. Like, I wanted to tell that story exactly the way I told it. And most of the feedback, it's not a lot of feedback, but most of the feedback is really good about how good a book it is. So,
it is a good book.
yeah. So it's a weird space. It's like, can you forgive yourself for being you in all those intricacies, like flaws, imperfections? Like, can you actually go, proud of you, mate? And it's like, did you knock it out of the park? No, I'm proud of you, mate. Did you win awards? No, I was shortlisted. I'm proud of you, mate. Like, it's enough. You did great. It's hard, though. Never easy in this industry.
No, it's not. Before cameras rolled, you said writers seem to be constantly trying to seek. How did you put it? You say it. Do you remember what you said?
Oh, I said that writers so often, they found the one space to seek validation where it's almost impossible to get. Like, you're dealing with people who literally are so indifferent and so business minded and just not personally motivated the way you are. So you go in there and you're like, look what I did. And they just knock it out of your hands sometimes. And they're like, what's this shit? And you're like, what's this shit? I love this shit. This is what I do. And so I do remember there was this one time they used to have publishing drinks in Melbourne when I used to live and work in Melbourne and study there. And this author was invited to publishing drinks. Now, at the time, I wasn't a published author. I was just working for the small press network. And they invited an author to publishing drinks. And that poor bugger, like the moment he was in a space with 120 publishing professionals, none of whom cared that he was this author with the book out or any of that. They've seen a lot of authors in their time, because that's what they do. They just work with a bunch of authors. And so you could tell he was trying to get that hit, that little bit of like, oh my God, you're ... And it was never going to come because that's not the space. Publishing is not the space unless you're really moving units to be told you're amazing. And then if you're moving units, you might suck and you'll be told you're amazing. So that's the real head about it, is that there's little to no correlation between quality and marketability sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes a great book just gets a push. But there are times when it bears little to no. I know it from, I used to work in a secondhand bookstore called Elizabeth's over here. And so there'd be a buzz book, and then the buzz book became the book people brought in for credit at Elizabeth's bookstores. So suddenly that copy of Twilight everyone was trying to get is one of 35 in the bin that you just can't move
Paul,
because
my husband has a used bookstore. Yeah, we it's insane. Like,
it's a weird feeling, right? That something's treasure, a point of treasure becomes not trash, but definitely devalued over that time. So like the consumptive aspect is a weird thing when you're a writer to sort of go, I don't hit that consumptive mark. Like I'm actually trying to do something else. And the biggest question that comes in my head, not so much I know the answer, but it still pops up, is like, why? You're in an industry that's consumptive. Why would you not be consumptive? And it's just, it's one of those weird inconveniences that the art I practice happens to be a really popular commercial type space. And so if I was in visual art, I'd just go, this is beautiful, I'm done. Like I don't need to unit. I mean, I'd still need to sell the artwork, but there wouldn't be this idea that there are 5,000, like I don't know, Mona Lisa or something. Like there's not 5,000 Mona Lisas lined up in the shop and you buy one. It's just one. It's art. So it's a weird thing about books is that the idea that they're really good is kind of secondary to the idea that they're shiftable as you. So I don't really know what to make of that. You got me thinking about it with You Belong Here because I was blown away by what I did in the book and like no one else cared. But I'm like, but don't you see? There's like 4 generations and there's all these interlinking stories. And I just set the bar so hard. And it was so weird because my inner critic was psyched. It's like, wow, you really pulled that off. And then it's like, cool, can you bring in some people to celebrate this? And he's like, no, it's just me. I'm your inner critic and I'm going to be proud of you right now for all you did. And I'm like, is there anything else for that? No, you just have to do it again next time, but harder and even better. So yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, talking about doing it again, one of the things that, because as an unpublished author, we think you get the book, you get the deal, you get it published, it gets out there, it does well, it doesn't do well. I think that most people know that like that is a secondary goal, is that not only to get the book out, but it actually does well. But then you're like, okay, well, providing I do okay, next book, you know what I mean? But then you have the book deal, and the publishing house closed, and that. When I just went, I was like, I think I shared with you, it was a huge aha moment for me because I went, oh, like, there's no guarantees. It's not like, you do it once and then, you don't have to go back and start at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, you're just always learning. I think that's the really crazy thing about it is that I figured there was like scaffolding that built over time. And there's freedom in always learning, and there's freedom in having your playhouses torn apart every time you've built one. But it is confronting. It's quite weird to go, hang on, I built this stuff and now it's gone. And it happens a lot. Like I find that if anything, that would be like the title of my memoir if it wasn't Love Dad, is like Playhouses or something. Because every strategic move I've made that I thought was genius at the time, through no fault of my own, fell apart, whether it's like the next creative project or that it's like I tried to get published in literary journals thinking that would lead into a full-length publication. And then some of these literary journals close or whatever else, they don't get funding anymore. So it's such a volatile space that the words on the page are the only thing that don't go away, really. Like there's so many moments as you go forth that you got to find confidence again. And you've got to find, I guess, for lack of a better word, sort of almost like the metal to go, I'm not going anywhere. Like, it doesn't really matter what you throw at me. I'll still write. So this was like my tagline when I first started writing my, not a great career bio, but my actual bio at the time was Laurie Steed as a writer, If the world ended tomorrow, he'd be the one etching rocks with stories. Like basically that I'd just keep writing. Even if the world ended, I'd be the one there writing it in the sand or whatever. And so I think on some level that's heartening that these playhouses we build are playhouses and they will knock down. So one of the things you said that resonated with me is even that idea of success, how hard it is as a debut author to get purchased, full stop, because no one knows who you are. And not only that, you're in a saturated world in terms of content. So there's not many human beings I know who just have immediately sticky personalities that everyone wants to know about. You know what I mean? Like, you'd have to be pretty charismatic if no one knows you for them to go, I want to know them. Like, if they're not famous, don't have anything like that. So it's even funnier that you sort of, and it's certainly now that I'm 46, and when I was 25, I had my youth, and now I don't. I'm just someone who really knows how to write, which is one of the most undervalued skills in the world, really, like to have that background. But I think it's just such a weirdly spiritual space, writing, in that you keep getting opportunities to give back and to be reminded that it's not all about you. And so the only trick, I think, for any emerging writer is to get how important collaboration is, and to get how important shared visions are, and to understand that even as five of you are trying to get your first book published, it's probably going to be the best time of your life before that book gets published, because there's five of you wanting to do the same thing with a shared vision, with time to do it, and with love in your heart. And so it's a weird thing that if you can find that space again, you're lucky, because the industry doesn't really work in that space. It's like it wants a lot from you. So I was talking to someone else about this. Like, just say Love Dad was massive, right? And it was a really big deal today. I'd be doing like 12 events and heaps of interviews. And you can see how I'm enjoying talking to you right now.
Yeah.
Now imagine I have to do that 12 times with strangers and people I don't like nearly as much as you. So like that's the hardest part of it, is that part of the deal is the deal. So it's like, well, if you want to be a big shot, you're going to have to be on for so much more. And you're going to have to be fake sometimes and like frothy. You're going to have to be like you would be on Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon or something. You'd have to be like, oh, yes. Oh my goodness, Jimmy, the book I wrote. And you'd have to do that. And that's hard too when you're already trying to get by in life. Like, I'd have to do like a method performance of an author when I can barely do me. Like, it's kind of crazy. No, I don't even know. I don't know. It's like, for me, it's just
I
a
love
win.
that your Jimmy Kimmel author guest has a British accent.
I should do it more often, right? He's only just come out for the first time today. But no, it came up because I have a friend who's a friend who has technically, I think she's up to 83 books now. And she self-publishes. And she was on Jimmy Kimmel. He did this one, like, it's a joke section. It's like books you should never read. And one of her books was on there, which she was, but she was kind of flattered. And it is really funny. And she told me, I think it was the day we were on a panel together, she told me about the story, and it's all public, so it's okay to talk about it, I hope. But no, it's fine, I think. But it was on Kimmel, and so that was the funniest thing. It's like, what a double-edged sword this is. You're on Kimmel. Wow, were you on Kimmel? Was it like the best book he's ever read? No. It was a book he told everyone not to read. And you're like, but I was on Kimmel. And so then it's like, you've got the metrics. You go, that's got to be publicity, so it's got to be good. But does it have to be good because it's negative? Like, I don't even know. I mean, for me, it makes me want to eat like a peanut butter sandwich just thinking about it. And, it's not easy to get those kind of things through.
You finished Love Dad. You had no idea of it getting published. And what changed? What went, like, Danuka, Mackenzie, who I spoke to recently, she said that she was an accidental writer. She came at it very personally, but she says once you write 80,000 words, your ego goes in your brain. You're like, hey, I could get this published. So was it just like that? It was like a switch just like went off in your head, like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll go get this published, or was there more to it than that?
Well, I guess it was kind of like a promise to the guy who wrote the 80,000 words that I would help. Like, I know they're both me, but it feels like they're not kind of. So, like, the kind of logical dad me, once that was all done, was like, oh, I should try and help this guy. He just wrote this book and see what I can do. So what I ended up doing actually was Faber Academy they used to run a course called the Book Proposal. And I knew I'd written a book, but I knew I'd also not delineated any of the plot or the structure or any of that stuff. So I did that with Rebecca Giggs from the Faber Academy. And that was, oh my goodness, like if ever there was like a British merchant over a movie and call it like an education or something like that, it would be like that, because Rebecca is really strategic and really savvy. And she's a really good writer too, but she actually has that part of the brain that thinks like this. So we started working on our book proposals in a group of 12, and I was messing around with that and trying to get things that looked publishable, and in terms of the book proposal. And there was a point where she said, look, if you want to hit like a big pub, this is what you would do. And this is like a recurring motif for me, because I was like, I don't want to do that. I just want this to be the memoir I wrote. And so then she's like, okay, cool. And then there was a point when we finished, and I said, hey, can you write me a supporting letter for like a state funding app? And she said, no, I can't, because I haven't read your work. I've just read the proposals and stuff. And I was like, well, that's fair call. And she said, why don't you contact this publisher and ask if they'll write you a support letter? And I said, can I even do that? And she said, yeah, of course. Like, people do it all the time. And so I did. And then the publisher said, weirdly, they said, yeah, I'll write a support letter. This does sound great. And if you want feedback on it as you're working on it, I'll be happy to do that. So in my head, I'm like, oh, that'll be helpful. This will be quite a long journey, but yeah, that would be incredibly helpful. So I write my funding letter. I get the funding, which is great. And then it's time to send the publisher the manuscript for feedback. So I do that in like December, I think maybe November, December of after Varuna. And then in January, like January 4, the publisher says, hi, I really like this. I'm going to take it to editorial in like 2 weeks' time, and I'll let you know. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then they took it. So it was the weirdest thing. I literally sent it for feedback, and it got published, which is not what I thought was going to happen at that stage at all. So that was a surreal thing, because it was only 6 months total. 2 weeks of which was at Varuna, about 3.5 months of which was working with Rebecca, and then this one publisher who said they'd be happy to give it feedback just liked it. So, I mean, I'd probably give full credit to Rebecca Giggs being much more savvy and smarter than me, and thinking there was an opportunity there to start that journey with an editor or a publisher, because I wouldn't have done it on my own. There's no way. Like, if I'd come out of Varuna, what I probably would have done was assessed it myself for about 9 to 12 months. I would have gone, this isn't good enough. I would have done it for another time, 9 to 12 months. I would have gone, it's still not good enough. And maybe like 5 years later, the book would have come out. But thankfully, there were people who kind of got, you know how that's that famous saying, you say, oh, you know, you can't edit a blank page. And so I think on some level, my assumption that I had to be perfect to even submit something was actually completely wrong. What was really the problem was that I was too scared to have done it wrong at that point, and that I'd get rejection on the wrong kind of rejection. Like, it's a good rejection where they say this is really good work, but it's not for us. But the wrong kind of rejection is like, oh my God, like, are you serious? And I was worried that would happen. But for whatever reason, I think Rebecca's confidence in the project meant a lot to me too. Because I don't know if you've read her book Fathoms, it's about whales. It's incredible. And so I usually go a lot further on the insight and wisdom of sensible people in certain parts of my career. So the writing's fine. It's just that I would have to be a grown-up and like do like strategic things or anything resembling that world. I mean, I would marry any smart, sensible person in the room. And they're not normally my friends or anything. They're just really good for the industry side of it, because I don't really get it. Like, it's probably even a topic for, I don't know what, like even maybe neurodiversity or something, but I don't have a diagnosis, so we won't go into that. It's just that I don't always get subtle and subtextual meanings in a space. I'm usually quite upfront and direct. So if someone does, and they're like, this is how you approach this in a way that will get you an outcome, they're like David Blaine or, like Darren Brown. I don't know how you just did that, because if I did it, I'd just be really anxious and I probably wouldn't get the outcome I wanted, and I'd wish I'd never done it. Whereas when they
Yeah.
do it with me, I get it, it works, and so it's kind of surreal feeling to kind of not know that much, but be able to get help with it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
yeah, I think I may have scattered the question there, but it was basically like what I did towards getting towards publication. So to answer your
Yeah.
question, I knew there was an opportunity there. I needed someone who was much more savvy and more used to winning and getting success to help me with it, because Rebecca does. Like, she gets stuff
Mm-hmm.
up and it gets done. And I also needed to be vulnerable enough to get help from another professional rather than thinking I had to do it all alone. So both Rebecca and Sam Twyford Moore, who runs the Faber Academy, were both peers and people I've known for like a decade. And I had to get vulnerable and go, hey guys, remember me? I know I'm supposed to have made it by now. I haven't. Can you help me with this project? And they both did. So I was really lucky.
No, it's lovely. And what I'm hearing a lot of is that, and I've had this experience myself, and that writers don't succeed so like alone. At least I haven't met
Mm.
anybody that has. I mean, you have a little writing group, and like you said, like you got 5 people, and they're all trying to get published, and then you meet some other people, and then you go back to those early friends. Maybe they've had different levels of success, and you ask them for their help to get you to the next stage, and it's just all very like writing is such a solitary practice. I feel like
Yeah.
sometimes we don't think about not just reaching out for help, but reaching out to get feedback or aid in some way.
Well, and I even think that, and I can't speak for all writers, I can only speak for myself. Like, I once was in a space that wasn't particularly helpful or wasn't
Mm-hmm.
particularly validating when I was younger. So it takes a lot of coding to go, hey, when you reach out now, they're going to be awesome and they're going to support you and they're going to help you. So for me, it's like a massive life shift to go, not only can I reach out now and I'm safe and I'm validated and I'm respected, but I have to if I want
Mm-hmm.
my life to turn out the way I want it to. So it's almost like universally beautiful, really. It sort of says that whatever once was is no longer, and it's okay to reach out. And I think that only other writers get how hard this gig can be sometimes, and how impersonal things can be, and how frustrating the challenges can be. So the other thing is that we kind of exist outside of that reality on like a heightened frequency of sensitivity in terms of the world. So our intensity can be quite confronting for someone who's not a writer too. And they can be like, how can you be so passionate about this thing that has no metrics that are measurable in any traditional sense? So another writer will tell you it matters that you even did it in the first place. So
Mm-hmm.
there's something really heartening in that. And I think, I'm pretty sure you did the readings as well, like when we read to each other
Yeah.
at
Yeah, for
Varuna.
sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a similar thing too, to actually sit there with words in process and have people tell you they're cool while you're doing them is really
Mm-hmm.
heartening. And I mean, I think the other thing is there are so many snakes and ladders on the writing board. So, I mean, I have friends who won the biggest prizes in Australia, and life presents some challenges for a while. So they've done this thing they're supposed to have done, and then it doesn't work out for a bit. And so then you've got to go back to being it. It's that Jack Cornfield quote we mentioned earlier, after the ecstasy of the laundry, like, no one
Mm-hmm.
gets out of this with just being awesome all the time, or very few people do. And if they did, they'd probably be pains in the ass to be around. And that's the other thing, is like there's probably like 4 writers that have that, and they'd be really hard work to be around. Whereas most writers are so used to that kind of indifference or that uphill slog of being a writer that you learn to be grateful for the things that other people might just shun or say,
Mm-hmm.
why do you even care? And it's like, if someone reaches out to you and talks to you about the words you've written, if one person does that, that's amazing. Like, that's incredible because it's a deep sort of connection there. And I do think most writers I know want to help in any way they can. And there's something about that. Like, they don't want to hurt, they want to help. Not every writer, there's some dodgy writers out there, but a lot of the writers I know, and certainly all the ones I met at Varuna, just a lot of kindness and compassion in that space. So I'm really glad that you backed yourself enough to go there and feel supported, because it's so important. And I hope it anchors you even now. Like, I know for me, it was 9 years between Varuna visits. So the first one I do is 2012. And somehow for 9 years, I've got to keep going and keep the faith. And then 9 years later, I get another shot. And I've missed the date for this next one for next year, which I'm eligible for, but it's not the right time. And so to have that much faith as well, that whatever's happening in your writing career at the point is the right thing to be happening, is brutal, but it's really helpful to just go, okay, well, it's not meant to be right now.
Well, I'm still in the spaghetti phase. So, you take the spaghetti and you throw it at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. Look, but I think that's the whole career, right? Like, I think what's really weird is, like, you take, if Love Dad spaghetti, like, the whole thing just stuck. And then other times I would have thrown that spaghetti and nothing stuck. Like,
Yeah.
I've got 3 unpublished manuscripts that will never see the light of day before You Belong Here. And I thought they were good spaghetti, but I was just learning how to make spaghetti, I was just
Yeah.
learning how to make the spaghetti the whole time. But I really thought I'd done it. I thought I was Mario Vincenzo, the great pasta maker, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was just learning what pasta was. So it's there's a real craftsmanship there. I remember an editor said to me one time, this is Zoe Datner, they used to run a great company called Sleepers Publishing, and she said the thing that writers forget is that writing is incredibly hard. Like, so they expect they're going to execute straight away with something that has so many moving parts, and like can take decades to really pick up the intricacies of what needs to be done and why. And because the written word is so common, that's quite different to an amazing story. Like, there's all kinds of guff out there that's like journalism or instruction manuals or legal documents, but actually to take the written word and make magic out of it, no wonder it takes a while. It's amazing that anyone can do it, really. So it's worth the energy and worth the effort. But as long as we can forgive ourselves for learning, because we always are as writers. Like, there's no mastery point. There's no point where they go, you're done, you're amazing, and you're beyond reproach by this point. So yeah, crazy gig, Joe. I don't know why we do it, but I do know why we do it.
That is a good question. Why do we do it? I don't know how to do anything else.
I can get.
I don't know. I don't know how to be anything else. It'd be like saying,
No,
Joe, why are you Joe?
It's deeply impersonal, deeply interconnected. It's not even a job. It's my life. Like, nothing's ever made as much sense to me. I've not found a drug that comes even close. Like, and it actually makes me better in the world as well. Like, as a person, I'm just kinder, more compassionate. So it's a weird thing. It's like a very meditative space. And it's not for everyone at all. Like,
No.
and if you wanted to be just famous, like, there are so many quick
better ways to do it.
Yeah. Like, there's so clearly not the quick fix for anything, but it is like a life balm. And it's like, I was saying to a writer I know who got an agent, and then like 5 years later, they didn't get a book out of that. They just had an agent for 5 years. And I said, ultimately, you're going to have to go back to the idea that the solace is what you've created, like that you still create beautiful work. And the commercial marketplace doesn't care enough about that for it to be a defining factor. But you can still be proud of it, and you can still acknowledge that it's great work. And then I think, you talked earlier about self-publishing. I would say there's never been a better time to look at various platforms of storytelling if one isn't working. for you. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like whether it's video or whether it's whatever. Like really, it's
Mm-hmm.
limitless as to what you might want to do instead
Yeah.
with
No, it
those same
is.
words. So it's a pretty hopeful time in that respect.
It is. It is. It is really cool. And another thing about writers, this is a little bit of a side, but I was at a presentation at Van School today, and it's Education Week here in Australia or New South Wales, and it was 175 years since the New South Wales school system, I guess, came into a bit. So they did a little bit of a history lesson, and the principal was going through all the different things that the school was used for and everything, and he said something about teaching and something about
Mm,
teachers, and it doesn't really matter what it was, but something in history.
mm,
And I look over at the teachers, and they're all like, and I went, huh. If that was the equivalent in a writing space, if you were talking to a bunch of people and there were writers in the room, and you said that
mm.
something amazing about a group of writers from 10, 20, 25 years ago, they would all get very excited. Like there
Yeah,
is there
yeah.
is a thing about being a writer, I think, and this is what I was reflecting on, was that it becomes part of who we are in a way that other
Mm,
professions don't. And I'm not saying that there's not teachers out there that, being a teacher is like their passion and they think about it, but it's
yeah.
not as common. It's not as like there was a whole room of teachers and none of them seemed to even respond. They're all listening, but they just went, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm like,
Well, there's attachment, right? Like there's a
mm-hmm,
compartmentalization that doesn't happen with writing. It's like even if you write in a different place, you still carry that around with you all the time, and you're processing it all the time. And I think the best writers also like at some point they just lose them, like the ego-y them that's in the room, and then they can really transcend whatever the
mm-hmm,
limitations are. So like if the book, whatever the book requires, wins, hopefully in the best creative space. So what was weird with Love Dad was that I'd made a deal with my creativity coach that whatever I wrote, whenever I wrote it, was going to be have authenticity, sincerity, and vulnerability. And once those three things were in place, it was impossible to write a book that was self-aggrandizing or entitled or anything because I had to
mm-hmm,
be vulnerable and I had to be
mm-hmm,
authentic and I had to be sincere. So it was a very weird space. So I think you're right that it's like, well, there's the two sides of it. In that doing the great work gives one pride as a writer, and so
mm-hmm,
the rewards in that space are so huge that you can't explain to someone else why you do it because you just
mm-hmm,
know it so intrinsically and how much value it has. And so the other thing that flipped me out the other day was I talked with a writer I used to hang out with in Melbourne in about 2008, and we caught up and talked about our greatest memory as writers since that time. And both of them, they weren't awards or anything. They were, in my case, it was being on the Black Sea in Bulgaria, and there was this song cycle that went on for 36 minutes that these two Bulgarian women sang. And in Nathan's case, it was he wrote this book called The Ghost Poetry Project, where he'd stay in haunted houses and write poems. And he was in this old castle, and I think it was in Tasmania or something. And he came out, and the moon struck down, in the middle of this abandoned, echoey castle. And some of that stuff is so ephemeral and so hard
mm-hmm,
to explain that, yeah, it's like you're pleasantly alone, and you're part of a greater canon of
mm-hmm.
thinkers and dreamers and hopers, and there's something pretty special about that. And it's pretty amazing to think that maybe the words on the page aren't the most important thing, even as a writer, that maybe the type of writer you are and the type of person you were as a writer is equally powerful. That, you know, my greatest moment might have been one of the days at Varuna in terms of
Mm,
my effect on the universe. Like it might not be the book, it might have
mm-hmm,
been talking to someone or whatever
mm-hmm,
else. And that's the same with every writer. So I think the other part to hold on to if you can is that writers are beautiful things and that you can sit with them and nurture them each
mm-hmm,
time you come across them, wherever they're at. And so that came up in a writing session last week. Someone said to me, I'd like to be a writer, but I'm not really a writer yet. And I said, but have you written something? And they said, yeah. And I said, you're a writer. Like, you might not have societal metrics on that, but you're doing it. Like, you're showing up. You've made the promise to yourself that you're going to do this. So, yeah, it's hard to unpack that sometimes, and even to understand just how amazing a thing it is to write. But it's pretty special, and that's way before the books come out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what I was trying to say rather poorly is that being a writer is, at least for me, a part of my identity. I cannot remember a time. I can remember a time when I couldn't read, and I can remember a time when I also couldn't write, but I cannot remember a time where I didn't consider myself a writer, uh, which seems odd.
Yeah.
But
No, that's awesome.
yeah, like I remember learning to read, and actually learned to read by writing. Um, and that my mother, testifies to that. She said, you couldn't read at the beginning of the summer, at the end of the summer, after writing this magazine you could read. And and so I had this journey, and yeah, like I feel like if you said I could only keep one kind of part of my identity, it would be that I'm a writer. It's like I couldn't give that up. And I don't think a lot of people feel that way about their job.
No, I
feel
think
like
you're right.
that's
And I think you're right. It's such a calling, and it fiscally, my experience hasn't really rewarded the amount of energy I put into it. But in
no.
terms of the actual spiritual side of it, it doesn't matter. Like, to ask a writer not to write or to not to be a writer is like asking a gecko not to be a gecko. Like, a gecko is a gecko. It's going to be a gecko. Like, it's a very strange thing that in the world we're in, creatives, and I'm going to expand it to creatives, but writers definitely get told all the time it's not viable. And you're like, well, it doesn't really matter because that's who I am. And so that's why I guess I encourage writers to be kind to themselves when they're not literally putting words on the page, because it doesn't matter, because they are writers and they're thinking about it and they're processing it, and a story's evolving even as they're sitting there. Just like, you could sit and watch people at a beach for half an hour, and you can bet that'll make you a better writer, having done that. If you've got those sensory things, I remember the first time ZZ Packer said to me, if you can't see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, and smell it, then it doesn't exist. And like, the moment she said that, I was like, oh, that's some fucking cool advice. Like, because then you're so switched on sensorially everywhere when you're not writing, when whatever you're doing. And so, like, you'll listen to a song and you'll isolate the parts of the song, the beats and the type of, the bass and the guitar and the drums and everything. And even if someone said to you, okay, you need to stop hearing everything that you hear as a writer, you can't even do that because there's just too many intricate parts all connected with it. And so even if someone said to me, we're not going to publish any of your books anymore, I'd still write. Like, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than books. Like, it's life. It's what we're meant to be here to do. And, like, the only exception I'd say is I have met writers who are like, I'm going to be a writer. And I'm like, okay, what are you going to do to get better at the craft? And they go, nothing. I'm a writer already. You're like, okay, well, that's cool, but the industry will exist and they will have metrics on that. So I think the hard part is that drive, which is understandable, to share our words, which everyone should have, and that's fine, or not everyone, but, if you want to share your words, that's a very understandable motivation. I think the hard part is that sometimes writers want to be there already. And that's understandable too. And I mean, it's not even isolated to writing. Like, someone might play basketball and go, I want to be at the NBA. And you're like, well, you're not yet. But there's something about being drawn to the page, I think, that says, at one point it's conditional, in my career anyway. At one point it's unconditional and it's the best and you're just flowing. And then the more you're into a sort of comparative and analytical space, people start going, you need to hit these marks, like you need to win an award or you need to get published or do all that. And then sadly, you hit this point of over criticism of your work, and that part of you that was psyched isn't as psyched anymore. So you've got to find that part again, or find a new version of that part that says, hey, no, you're good, you're great. Like, you're doing this exactly like you were doing it before, and it matters now. And so I think we're always our hardest critic. Like, we've got to be able to look at ourselves and go, you did really well there. You worked really hard at this, and I'm really proud of you. And even if something shitty happens, you've got to be able to go, that's really hard. That sucks. That must be really hard that you're going through that right now, because I know you wanted to be up here and you feel
Yeah.
like you're there. So compassion is massive. Self-compassion, which I've only really learned recently, because what got me here was never going to get me to love Dad. Like, what got me to success in literature was a hard ass, like the guy in Whiplash, like the worst, most hardcore critic pushing me to be better and better. And then at some level, what was going to get me back to love and enjoying what I did was the exact opposite. Like, it was like kindness, compassion, enoughness. Like, it's a weird feeling to kind of go, wait, so that you hit a wall. You hit a wall
Yeah.
of perfectionism and criticism that just can't work for your life. And especially once you have children and you can't put that on them. Like, I had it on me my whole life. And then the moment I had my boys, it was like, no, if they drop a ball, that needs to be okay. Like, that needs to be fine. If they spill a drink, that can't be the end of the world. And then fortunately, I guess, once that happened with my boys, I couldn't do it to me anymore either. It's like, well, I can't be like that with me because I'm doing my best. And we all are. So, yeah, anyway, I realize I'm taking a huge amount of talking all kinds of things with you. I should probably
No,
be
it's
working more
lovely.
to the
It's lovely. Don't
structure and
even worry
format.
about it. But yeah, I mean, and I think that is key to the writer life. The writer life is life, and probably creatives, as you say, not just writers. Um, it is life. It's different than a job. It's not something you put down. It's actually
Yeah,
something that takes work, at least for me, to put down. It takes work for me to
yeah.
go, I
I,
can't write right now. I got to go be mom, or I got to go be, friend
yeah.
or wife or daughter. I have to go and like into the real world outside my nice little writing space and outside my books and my little world, and I need to go like engage with the people that love me and support me and give back
Like,
to them.
it's an ecosystem,
Um,
right?
hmm?
It's a total ecosystem. Like,
Yeah.
you need those other things. I was watching an interview with Nikola Jokic, who won the NBA championship this year, and he was
Hmm.
the MVP too. And they said, "Oh, so basketball must be everything to you, huh?" And he goes, "No." He's like, "I've got family, I've got all these other things." He's like, what would that be if it was everything? Like, it can be an awful big part of your life, but we need perspective on things. Like, I think that's the craziest thing. Like, there was this wonderful doco called Dig, about the Dandy Warhols and this other band. They were best mates coming up together, and the other band's the Brian Jonestown Massacre. Brian Jonestown Massacre were an amazing band. They were a mess, man, and they just didn't really have anything else other than the music. And so the lead singer in particular, he's a genius, and he's playing on his keyboard, he's getting all the stuff together, but he's a hot mess because there's so much going on, and he doesn't have those outside spaces where he's just enough. And I guess there's always versions of that, like even someone like Bobby Fischer in chess as well. Like, you could be the best in the world at something, but if you have no perspective outside of that, then it can't love you the way that people do. That's the thing. So writing is incredible, but it still can't love you the way that a good person can. It can't quite give you the level of affirmation and enoughness. So they have to work in tandem. It can be pretty close, but on some level, the part of the deal with writing is kind of part of the deal with life, which is that you have to show up. And so to show up means you're going to be vulnerable and means you're going to need people sometimes and all kinds of things. So I think writing takes a long time to get right. So if you're spending 6 years on a book, you're going to need coffees and you're going to need time with real people who want it. I mean, I've got one friend who just talks never about writing with me, but I'm really glad when I see him because I just know it's downtime and we'll talk about 80s TV shows or whatever.
Hmm.
So it's, yeah, I often get anxious before I'm about to enter into the non-writing space because I know I don't know any of the metrics there. But it's once I'm in it, I'm like, cool, you love me for me, and I don't need them. I don't need everyone to love me for Laurie the writer. I don't mind if some people just think I'm a fun guy who happens to write. And I think that's important too. Like I used to really only hang around people who wanted to see me as the writer, but then when I was going as a hard time as a writer, it was like, can I even catch up with them? And of course I can, but it just felt like pressure that I needed to have achieved something or have a book coming out or whatever, and you don't. No, I guess just hope, faith, and other people. Hope, faith, and the joy of good people in this world. And nothing's ever permanent. So if you feel like you just got rejected for a story, that's true in the moment, but you can bet there's a moment where you don't get rejected in it. And people are right about you not being enough in the writing space until they're just wrong one day. So like they can give you no's for like years. And then one day you've got the yes. And so every no is irrelevant once that's happened. So we're always in pursuit of yeses both inside of us and outside of ourselves. So keep the faith. If you're writing, you're meant to be writing and you're going to do great. For the moment, whatever reason, Instagram feels like a really groovy space for me and I get to be my most vulnerable and authentic. So if anyone wants to follow me on Instagram, I'm on Laurie Steed Author. I think I do have a Facebook profile, but that's like my profile, but you're welcome to join and say g'day if you want to. And I'm on LinkedIn at like Laurie Steed. But yeah, I mean, those are probably the places to connect with me. Obviously, I have two books, and one coming in February. So it's You Belong Here, Love Dad, and then Greater City Shadows, the book that Varuna wouldn't let get written yet, comes out in February 2024.
That is so exciting. I did not know that. You are like the secret
So I've got another book coming in February. I know, it's pretty insane, right? So for some reason, once I wrote Love Dad, I could go back to Greater City Shadows, and it suddenly made sense, and I knew what I wanted to do with it. And yeah, things happen pretty quickly with that too, which is really weird when you've had like 2 to 3 years of nothing happening with a book and real almost aggression and indifference to it. But we finally found the right home for it, and that's a book of short stories, mostly about friendship and about the importance of like people getting you through tough times. So I really love that book. Like, again, I don't know about the other stuff, but I loved it when I wrote it. And then no one loved it, and I still loved it. So I was like, oh, well, bad luck. I still love it. And so now that it's out, it's coming out. I'm really willing for that to find its right readers, whoever they are. And so while Love Dad is like hopefully a hand held out for like new fathers and things like that, I just think Greater City Shadows is like a thank you note to everything that made me as a writer. So he's hoping you get to read it and love it, and I'd love to come back on the show when that comes out.
Yes, I was just gonna say you beat me to it. I was like, you'll have to come back and for season 2,
it's been a joy,
and we'll talk some more. Thank you.
As in the podcast, absolutely. My God, this is the best podcast, guys. And you don't know Jo as well as me, but you will know her. And she is incredible. And she's such a soulful, incredibly like helpful person in the literary community too. Not everyone is as helpful. So if you're like me, you should follow this podcast, and you should follow Jo's journey too, because this is stuff of legend in the making. So follow the podcast. There'll be links in the description for all of this. But in the meantime, it's great to be here. And yeah, thank you for taking the time to watch this podcast, even as it develops.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have a new tradition, because it's a new podcast, where the previous guest asks, they don't know who's coming, the next guest, a question. And I had a giggle because I did actually know that it was going to be you. And I think I know your answer, but I'm not going to answer for you.
I've actually often got asked this, but what is your relationship to Goodreads, and how do you react to, negative reader kind of reviews or feedback?
Oh, it's a great question. Look, I tend to read them occasionally, and see, you're talking about negative reviews specifically?
That was her, like, so she did a 2-part question, I believe. So her first part of the question is how do you navigate the Goodreads space? What do you do about Goodreads, I think is how she put it. And then what do you do when you get negative feedback or a negative review?
Yeah. Okay. So how I navigate the space in Goodreads is pretty poorly. I probably place more importance on it than I should, or I certainly used to. Because I guess really it's kind of like, imagine if there was like a phone outside a movie theater and you had to press thumbs up or thumbs down on a movie, and you're like, that was a 180-minute celluloid story, and I get a button. So I think that's what's hard with things like star ratings and stuff like that. Because it's also like, if you ever got a school report and they have to give a grade and then they have to give a comment, and sometimes the grade and the comment don't match. So like you can get, like, I got a 4-star for You Belong Here, and the person said, oh, but the writing's clunky. And I was like, clunky? Like, I'd rather you gave me no stuff then, because that upsets me, the clunkiness. So it's kind of funny that it'd be like, I don't think everyone should have a microphone necessarily, and Goodreads is like the biggest karaoke room where everyone gets the mic for a second. And so you've got to, I love readers and I think they're incredible. I don't think Goodreads shows readers at their best. It shows them more consumptive than perhaps they are. And so if someone says you've got 2 lines and a star rating, I just don't think it's going to bring them most optimal engagement as a default. But I respect people who use it. It's not my metric because it'll mess with my head too much. And I think, so to answer that question just a little bit more, with Love Dad, I'm genuinely prepared for people not to get it. And with You Belong Here, it blew my mind that people didn't get what I was trying to do. Way too much. Like, I'd go, what do you mean? Like, how could you not get what I was doing? But they were expecting a book that was like a water slide, not a roller coaster. So, like, Goodreads is not a good space if you're experimental in any way, shape, or form, because people want books that are like books. So that was instrumental. But in terms of getting negative reviews, that probably feeds into it. So one of the things I did was go, your books aren't for everyone. And that was a really liberating thing, because on some level I thought they were. And that's embarrassing, but I really did. I thought, there's no one who's not going to like what I write. And then the more negative reviews come in, you go, they really didn't like that. That's interesting. And if someone leaves like a 1 or a 2-star with no comments, you're like, well, I can't take that person seriously because they didn't even write a review. Like, I mean, what do you do with 1 star? You just go, 1 star. Wow. And then sometimes a comment will do that and they'll say, I didn't finish it, or I barely started it. And you're like, well, you can't give it 1 star. You got to earn that 1 star. Like, I watch Howard the Duck. I watched Howard the Duck 3 times as a kid, right? So if anyone's going to give Howard the Duck a bad review, it's me. I know that movie back to front, and I've earned that right to give it a bad review. But I do think, like, well, you should never do the close off, walk away review. Like, you should always try and engage with the text and go, okay, well, this is it. So no, I don't think I'm going to become a Goodreads breakout star anytime soon. But I also think, on some level, like, you got to be cool with you doing what you did. And if you aren't, then maybe you are in a more commercial space than you think, because you wrote the book. Like, if you're okay with it, then ultimately it's noise. It's still frustrating noise, but it's like, you can't take it personally, because it's not about you. It's wholly about them in most ways. Like, it's about them expressing their individuality. And more power to them. I did nearly comment on 1 negative review for You Belong Here, and I was torn between saying thank you and saying another word that ends with another phrase that ends with you. And I didn't think either was a good approach, so I left it alone. But I hope that answers the question. I think never take that as the default setting. Like, if you're proud of the work and you've worked hard, then I would have to have like Ian McEwan or David Mitchell writing me a 1-star Goodreads with a very long review, and then I'd take it personally. But
Those
ultimately,
are
like,
highly
we earned our right to
specific.
be there, right? Oh, look, I mean, honestly, Margaret Atwood, same thing. But it's like, you've got to look at where it's coming from. And readers are awesome, and they deserve full credit for that. I'm not saying they don't know what they're talking about. I'm just saying, like, if you're going to take on feedback, then ultimately you do need to take that into account yourself and go, okay, do I value this? Do I even know this person? Sometimes you could go, well, they might have a point, actually. I'll look at the next book. But ultimately, the power resides with yourself. And I also would never encourage a writer to antagonize anyone on Goodreads. It seems like that's a really bad idea. So
Yeah.
I think the danger is in wanting mass approval. I'm not sure you can ever get it. Like,
No.
I think the more readers you get, the more likely one reader's going to love it, one reader's going to hate it.
I also have noticed on Goodreads, because I go in and out of phases where I'll read books and review them, and then I'll go through phases where I read them and I don't go on Goodreads at all. But I have noticed that there is not like the value of a 5-star from some people is very different than the value of even a 4-star from other people. It's very like it's very arbitrary, and I try and go more like a lot of people will be like a 5-star is perfect. There's nothing wrong with this book, and I kind of as soon as I noticed that I went, you know what, that actually isn't helpful because nothing's perfect, and you can probably nitpick anything.
Yeah.
So I try not to like think that way because I realize that because I've got friends that are like yourself who books are on there, and I don't want you to see like if a 4-star is like pretty much as good as you're ever going to get from me. I'm like, no, it's got to be like it's a 5-star, even if it's not perfect. It's going to be a 5-star because I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, you've hit the nail on the head, which is like, to me, if I could make a couple of changes to Goodreads, I would remove the star rating system, period. And I would also make everyone themselves. Like, no one's going to have like a no pitch or whatever. Like, everyone's just them. And then that kind of ties into this idea that if you have something to say, here's hoping it's quite insightful or profound, and you want to share that about this book in a really deep, meaningful way. I just don't think Goodreads does it justice, really, the reading experience, because the reading experience is incredible. It's like an imaginarium of the mind, you know. So to actually honour that, I think it would be really cool if there was less star ratings and more commentary on the work, and even like more questions about the art and the craft of it all. Like if I had a list of like an Ask Me Anything, I'd be on there every day talking to writers about it because I find it so interesting. But the notion of like good, great, poor, all of that, that's just lacking imagination from the Goodreads guys, to be fair to them. Like, they could have done some amazing things with that platform, and it's sort of it's a reductive space, which is a shame because books aren't reductive at all. They're the opposite. So it's, well, a lot of books. So I think for me, it's just a flawed system that in no way you could put a blame on a single reader for that. But you could certainly argue that the system itself gives this sort of popcorn approach to books, and books are bigger than that, and they could be much more interesting to talk about than that. So, you know, I think it's this weird web sort of space where people get to quantify and qualify, and it's not, I think, therefore I am. Like, people are like, I rate, therefore I am, and they don't. Like, it doesn't do much unless you buy in, unless you care. And so I think the other thing that something that Goodreads could do, if you're not careful, is get you reactive and get you acting like your book is being affected by these things so profoundly that you need to confront these people or to argue with them. And I think it's a really good exercise in letting go, because on some level, someone gave you a 1 star, and they're not even your enemy. They're not even your friend. They're just some person who read your book and came across it for some reason. So it's really zen to go, oh my God, I could do something I think's beautiful. And someone will go, that sucks. And you're like, oh, I guess it sucks to them. Oh, well, what do I do? Do I stop? No, I'm not going to stop. Like, I guess it sucks. It's kind of like asking people out for a date. Like, someone's going to go, you smell. And you're like, I smell. I don't want to smell. And then you're like, oh, well, they think I smell. Maybe I'll go to someone else because I don't think I smell. Like, I'm pretty sure I washed. So it's like on the same level with Goodreads. It's like if someone says worst book ever,
No,
you're like, I'm pretty sure it's not the worst book ever. But if I argued with you that it was the worst book ever, then we both look like dickheads. And so it's a weird thing of going, okay, I just want to accept. I reckon that's like, man, there should be a class in that for writers. Letting go. Like letting go of all of that and just going, okay, something happened today. Doesn't matter. Okay, something cool happened today. Doesn't matter. Like you kind of just got to be right in the middle zone all the time and just keeping on, keeping on. Like, it's like, the old blues guys used to do shows like, I don't know, back in the day. And like the crowd would applaud and they'd look kind of just grumpily at the crowd. Like there's some sort of nobility in that too, that of course they're valued, but on the same level, you don't want to be that externally focused that you're trying to get people to say nice things about your book. That's dangerous too. So, good question, Danuka. I hope I get to catch up with you soon. She's a gun. I love her work. And she's super nice too, from what I've seen. I
oh,
haven't
she's
never met her
lovely.
face to
She's
face, but
lovely. Yeah.
yeah, she's super cool. And also marketable. High five. I mean, marketable writer.
Yes, yes,
Nice
she
one,
is.
Danuka.
Yes, she is.
Let her teach me how to be marketable. Yeah, that'd be cool. And no, do I have to ask the question now for the next
Yes,
one, or
please.
do I email
Yeah,
you?
yeah. Ask the
Excellent.
question.
All right. So whoever the next writer is,